Hello students and welcome to lesson C-3, which is the third lesson of the course introduction, and today we will focus on listening comprehension and global English. This is a recording of the lesson itself, so the actual listening comprehension tests will not be covered in this recording. However, I will instead record parts of the grammar lecture. So as you know, the course introduction is built on 4 parts where we've already covered the course itself and some writing comprehension. And then the previous lesson focused on reading. Today is going to be listening, and lesson C4 will cover speaking comprehension. As you know, you are meant to be tested on these different skills as part of the introduction. And today, as I mentioned, we'll be listening. And the part of the listening test, you can find that on my website. So if you're curious and want to see it, you can find it over there. But today, instead, we are going to look at the grammar, which will be a continuation from yesterday's, the lesson C2's grammar on compound and complex sentences. So please take notes. Make sure that you write down any questions that you have, and please let me know, and I will help you. So let's repeat what we covered last time. In the very most basic sense, a part of a sentence and the way we look at languages is known as a clause. In Swedish, that's called sats, and there are several kind of clauses. And the very most simple clause that you could create is made with a subject and a verb. For example, like I ate. So if someone asked you what you did yesterday, you could just answer them, well, I ate. And that is a independent clause. A independent clause means that it's standalone, it can survive on its own, it doesn't require any other information to be understandable. And this is then, in this case, a full sentence as well, because it gives you a complete idea of what you want to tell the listener. But as you carry on and develop your English skills, you want to become more advanced. And one way to do this is to create what is known as a compound sentence. And what you do is that you take 2 of these independent clauses and then you connect them in the middle using a conjunction. A conjunction is a word that connects parts of your language. And what you're going to do now is you're going to use one of the conjunctions here from what we call fanboys. So fanboys stands for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. So please remember fanboys, and it will make it easier for you to create a compound sentence, right? Okay, so it could look something like this. I ate and I read. And here you got a larger, more complex sentence where you incorporated the first one, I ate, but you added some information. Also, because you want to vary your language, you want to become even more advanced, you also want to use what's known as a complex sentence. And a complex sentence uses one of those independent clauses, the one we just saw right before this, I ate in this case, and then you want to connect it with what is known as a dependent clause. And a dependent clause cannot be standalone. That's why it's called dependent. It depends on an independent clause. And we're going to look at an example in just a second. But when you create a complex sentence, you want to use what is known as a subordinating conjunction. There are many of these, but some of them, we have them on the screen right now, could be such as although, while, because, if, since, and so on. In this case, it could look something like this. After reading, I read a book. Or after eating, I read a book. after eating, I read a book. So if the reason why after eating is a dependent clause is because it doesn't work on its own. If someone asks you what you did last night, and you're just gonna say after eating, there's going to be this really awkward silence because they're sort of expecting something else to happen. So that is the dependent clause, and then you have an independent clause, which is I read a book. Which is a perfectly standalone, doable, independent clause. So this is a repetition of what we covered last lesson. Now we're going to combine these into what is known as a compound complex sentence. And a compound complex sentence is always built by using two independent sentences or in two independent clauses, and then you also want to have a dependent clause. All right, so two independent, one dependent, and the order can shift a little bit. So let's look at some examples here. So as I just showed you previously, we're going to use the same words here and so on. We're going to say after eating, I read and I watched TV. Okay, after eating, I read and I watched TV. Here we can see that the first part is a dependent clause, after eating. We know that because we're using the subordinated conjunction after. And then we have two independent clauses, I read and I watched TV, that we combine and connect using one of the fanboys. In this case, it's the fanboy and. So please remember, use fanboys and subordinated conjunctions. Let's look at an example where I switch the order slightly. Let's consider this sentence. Because I like Korean food, I have visited Seoul and tried Korean barbecue. Here I try to color code them once again to make it a little bit more easy to see what part is which. So we know that because is a subordinated conjunction. Therefore, the very first part of this sentence is a dependent clause. Because I like Korean food. All right, so that could actually be a fully standalone sentence. If someone asks you, oh wow, why did you order Korean barbecue? You could say, well, because I like Korean food, full stop. But in this case, when we carry on using the reasoning here and want to extend it, it becomes a dependent clause. Looking at something like this, I like Korean food, and then we see we have two of these independent clauses connected together using the fanboy and. And as I mentioned to you earlier, the sentence order can actually shift. So it doesn't have to be that the dependent clause is at the beginning. We can switch around like this. Here it looks a little bit different, but the contents are the same. I have visited Seoul and tried Korean barbecue because I like Korean food. Okay, so it's the same sentence essentially, but the order is switched. So the core thing to bring with you when learning how to use a compound complex sentence is that you want to vary the way you construct your sentences, and it makes you become more advanced. And when you do use these ideas, please make sure that you remember fanboys. You want to connect your two independent clauses with one another, and then you want to add a subordinated conjunction. All right, this is going to be the end of this recording. The reason is that the following slides are just practice, but if you want to practice your grammar and you want to see more of this, please visit my website, feke.online, where you can find all of our lessons together. And if you want to come in contact with me, you can always let me know via my email or our Teams at school, or the frågelådan that I have at my webpage as well. Thank you very much for taking part of this. Have a nice afternoon and bye.